We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Moving on to Hector. Don't know his relationship status. Hector has a pair of RBH R5BI speakers powered by a Dayton Audio DTA-120 amplifier, which is 40 watts per channel times 2 into 8 ohms. It's a great little amp for $100 and works great when playing uncompressed files with Foobar 2000. But with some less than well-mastered content, such as some YouTube videos, the Dayton struggles to amplify to reference volume.
I wonder if he's talking about our videos. I wonder if that's what he's
less than quality. I don't know.
I think it's more like your ears are struggling to tolerate it. It may be able to amplify it to reference volume. Can we recommend another amp with a similar form factor that can give him the maybe 50% extra volume he needs in those situations? I'm kind of confused as to why he would put it like that. First of all, how you know you need 50% extra volume, and why it's doing a good job with these well-mastered uncompressed files, but not with stuff that is going to sound worse. I don't think a better amp helps the things that are compressed to sound better.
Well, yeah, technically, 50% more volume means he needs double the power.
Yeah,
more than double.
More than double power.
Like, double power is only 3 decibels more,
right? 3 decibels, right?
Isn't 50% more?
Wouldn't he need 400 watts per channel?
Something like that.
Well, that would be 100% extra volume.
Okay, thanks,
multiplying by 10. Right? That'd be a full 10 decibels louder if you had 10 times as many watts, which would be 100% louder. It would be a doubling of volume.
Right.
So. I think reading between the lines, certainly I've come across plenty of YouTube videos where the volume level of the video is low, right? Like that.
I usually have the opposite problem.
There's that too, yeah.
The volume blares on, but then I'm watching weird viral videos and funny things. You know,
I have a suspicion that maybe that's what he's talking. He's just talking about content where the volume level on the content itself is just low, and even if he turns this amplifier, because it has its own little volume knob on the front,
right?
Even if he turns that all the way up, it's not getting as loud as he wants it to. Essentially, he just needs more gain. Right?
Is his YouTube video player set to lower volume?
There's that. There could also be the gain setting in his computer. Or whatever device he's using to feed this external amplifier. Maybe there's more gain to be had in there.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if there's a volume adjustment going on here somewhere, either in the mixer or in the YouTube player itself. Check all that first.
Yeah, exactly. Check all that first.
Start with your source.
But all of that aside, it could be simply the case because those RBH R5BIs, they can absorb a lot of power. They can absorb about 200 watts. He's giving them a maximum of 40 in the case of this amplifier. There is more capability for those speakers to absorb more watts and play louder. So yeah, we were referencing, how much power it takes. If you double the number of watts, you get 3 decibels more output. If you multiply the number of watts by 10, you get 10 decibels more output. Now, to sound roughly 50% louder, you need 5-6 decibels more. So that would be like double it once. In this case, that would get him to 80 watts per channel. Double it again to 160 watts per channel. That's probably going to make it sound about 50% louder. And those speakers that he has can absorb that much power. So that's possible. Now, he said he wanted it in a similar form factor to the DTA-120. That's a challenge. That's a real, because that's a little Class T amplifier that just sits nicely on your desk. So Parts Express do have that Lepai. It's a model number that wouldn't be memorable. It's the LP7498E. It's 100 watts per channel. Class D amplifier, 100 watts per channel. Now, we've recommended that amp before, and people have told us it actually runs kind of hot, and sitting at idle, it sits there and burns about 9 watts. So it's not actually the most efficient thing out there. But everyone has said it still sounds pretty darn good. And 100 watts per channel, well, you're going to get at least 3 decibels louder. I don't know if that's enough.
Yeah.
To get what you really want, you're kind of looking for like a 200 watts per channel amplifier.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, if you were going to go for that and you want something that's not going to break the bank, I'm going to point you to like a Crown professional amplifier. Still over at Parts Express, they have their Crown XLi 800. That is a 2-channel amplifier, 200 watts per channel into 8 ohms. It still does have independent gain knobs for the left and right channels right on the front of the thing. It's not nearly as small as either of those other two, though. It's about... probably about 8 times the size. So if you took about 4 of them and then put 4 more on top, that's probably the kind of size you're looking at.
Right. There's also that convenience problem where you can't just reach over and turn one knob.
So James is showing us something here. What have you got there?
Yes, this is, well, I moved to this new apartment and I didn't want to move my home theater equipment. So I have it's from Parts Express. It's a Topping Topping VX1. It's only 25 watts per channel, but it has a USB connection in the back for connecting it to your PC and or other USB devices. I find that I get a better control over my sound from things like YouTube and that because it's connected via USB and going through the audio analog.
So
and
it becomes a sound card.
It becomes a sound card. And it's easier to control. And 25 watts.
Yeah.
I'm running Cambridge Soundworks Ensemble, just the small ones. They're kind of hungry for power too, but they're okay. That's something he may want to look as his interface between his laptop or his devices and his actual amplifier.
Yeah, like to me, I honestly feel like what he needs is more gain in the signal as opposed to a substantially more powerful amplifier.
Yeah.
Because like we're saying, even if you're doubling, quadrupling the power, it's like, yeah, that's one way to get there. But if the problem is simply that some of the content you're watching starts out with too low a volume level, really all you need is gain. That's really all you need. So yeah, maybe an external sound card would be a better, more cost-effective solution to this.
I'm just confused. I'm still going back to how uncompressed files of FooBar 2000 sound fine, but then YouTube doesn't.
Well, I mean, if he's talking about music, I mean, almost all music is mixed at a pretty high gain level.
Yeah, its noise floor is going to be a little nasty too.
Possibly, yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I've certainly come across plenty of YouTube videos where, it's just they have the gain level on their video was mastered really, really low. And that's the problem. And if that's the situation, that, I think you're better served just getting more gain. And just an external sound card would do that for you.
Yeah.
Hector has more questions.
He does.
He does. He says that Dr. Floyd Toole, of course, we all know Dr. Floyd Toole, espouses the importance of having a center speaker in addition to the front mains to affix the center image where it should be, instead of allowing one speaker to gain dominance or have the center image collapse entirely to one side depending on your position relative to the mains. However, we have often expressed the opinion that not having a center is fine. He's heard us give reasons for this, but doesn't really understand this position. Can we further explain and justify our reasoning? By the way, I would just like to point out that I kind of disagree. I'm sort of, I guess I'm Dr. Floyd Toole-ish in that I think you do need to have that center because if you're not in the sweet spot, that's just what it's all about. And that's just from my own personal experience. My living room is wide and shallow, so I'm only about 10 feet away from my screen. But, there's a couch and then chairs on either side of the couch off to the left and right. And without that center channel, it does all collapse to one speaker. If you're in the center, of the couch, it sounds fantastic, even without the center channel. But
and that's more or less where Tom and I have come down on this, which is that, to be realistic, very often the only person who cares is the person who's listening to this podcast.
Right, the guy in the center.
And if that person has the prime seat location that is in the sweet spot, and you run a phantom center, right, which is just you have stereo front, left, right speakers and no physical center speaker,
right,
it's going to sound like it's coming from right in between those speakers. That phantom center works really well when, exactly like Lee said, you're in the sweet spot.
That's right.
And for the people who are outside of the sweet spot, now, Dr. Floyd Toole, a lot of the experiments that he runs, first of all, he runs a lot of the experiments in mono, and then he runs them with a group of listeners, right? And he gets the group consensus with people sitting in different locations, and if he's doing stereo tests, it's still in a group setting. And we absolutely agree. If you have a group of people, and that group of people all cares about imaging, then you gotta have a center speaker.
That's right.
If you go to a big movie theater, you got to have a center speaker, right?
Absolutely.
Because the people sitting off to the sides are not going to have the dialogue coming from the middle of the screen. And you're maybe going to have some people who actually care about that in a full-size movie theater. But yeah, where Tom's position and my position on it's okay sometimes to run a phantom center, it's particularly when people write to us with a question where the center speaker they're going to have is going to be in a really compromised position. You know, it's going to be way up high or way down low.
Sure.
Or it's going to be a drastically different speaker than their front, left, right, and the timbre match is going to be horrible anyway, right?
Sure.
And we're like, just run a phantom center in that case, because you're probably the only person in your house who cares. You'll be sitting in the sweet spot, and that's going to sound better to you, the one person who cares in your house, than running a really compromised center speaker, right? So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense to Mitch. It's a lot of caveats, or to Hector, sorry. That's a lot of caveats.
To me, the only time that a phantom center is appropriate is the same situation where a curved screen is appropriate. One person sitting in one perfect spot and nothing and no one else matters. If that's the case, that's great. But like, if you're like me, or you're like the previous questioner, Charlie and his wife, you know, human beings occupy, you know, finite amounts of space, and you can't both just sit with your heads pressed together in the center. So I like a center channel. I like to flop over on the side of the couch, the armrest, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah, James, your thoughts?
Everything that you and Tom have said about the phantom centers is correct. It's a solution to a problem that you can't resolve either than using a phantom center channel. Excuse me. I like center channels, and they work great. But you have to, when people listen to your podcast, you have to really understand that when you're talking, whose problem you're solving at that time.
That's right.
And that's really important. And then the big difference in timbre match between three speakers, if you have one that's really, really bad, a phantom center channel, a phantom center channel is the way to go, because then the timbre match is all the way across. You get a good race car effect going from left to right or right to left, and it doesn't sound like a Ferrari and then a Volkswagen and a Ferrari.
Very nice.
That's always a good thing. Yeah.
We have more questions. A couple of episodes ago, Rob discussed at length what sounded like a concentric driver speaker design in regards to how another listener felt it produced, quote, realism. KEF describes their speakers as having concentric drivers. Is their design the same? And just to be clear, am I correct when we say concentric drivers, we mean what I always picture as a car stereo speaker with the tweeter in the center?
Right. So, okay, so let's define that first.
Yeah.
Let's say you have a woofer and you have a tweeter in the middle of that woofer.
Mm-hmm.
That by itself is a coaxial design.
Coaxial.
It means that the two drivers share one axis, right? So there's the one axis that would go through the middle of both the tweeter and the woofer. So that makes it coaxial.
I gotcha.
To be concentric, they have to be physically lined up with each other, right? So the tweeter is literally where the dust cap of the woofer would be, and not forward of that position or rearward of that position, right?
Okay.
So if it's forward or rearward, then it's still coaxial. But if it's right where the dust cap would be, it's flush with the physical surface of the woofer, then it is concentric.
So the front planes of the speaker drivers are
equal.
Yeah. So concentric is always coaxial, but coaxial is not always concentric. that
makes sense.
That would be the way to put it. So,
okay.
But
Yeah. Because sometimes the tweeter sticks out farther, so that's
right. So that's coaxial, but not concentric. But concentric is always coaxial because
all right.
Right there.
All things being equal,
concentric is a type of coaxial speaker.
That's right.
Okay,
that's right.
Perfect.
Yeah, but what he was talking about, we were talking about the JTR speakers, specifically the 1212s, which use, now they call it concentric. Physically, it isn't. Perhaps acoustically, it's concentric, and that's their claim. But truthfully, it is a coaxial speaker where they have a compression tweeter that happens to be in the middle of a large 12-inch woofer. Therefore, the 12-inch woofer is essentially acting as a horn for this compression tweeter that's embedded in the middle of it.
Oh.
that by itself has nothing to do with whether or not the speaker sounds realistic or anything like that. I think Hector heard me talking about one specific aspect of that speaker design, but what I was really driving at when it came to what made those JTR 1212 speakers sound realistic is that they have very, very low distortion. Right? Very, very low distortion is what allows a speaker to sound realistic. It gives you that eerie, uncanny sense that you're not even listening to a speaker, that in fact you're listening to some real live person or real live instrument in your room, and having very, very low distortion of every form of distortion is what gets you there.
Right.
So I was saying this design that they have aids them in lowering distortion because a concentric speaker design doesn't guarantee, but it makes it easier to make sure that the dispersion pattern of the tweeter is the same as the dispersion pattern of the mid-range. And going back to Dr. Floyd Toole, that's one of the things that he really strongly espouses, is that the dispersion pattern of the high frequencies should be as close to, if not identical to, the dispersion pattern of the mid-range frequencies, so that when you get these reflections off your sidewalls and ceilings and things like that, you're getting even reflections of those frequencies. You're not getting some frequencies reflecting and not others, right? High frequencies tend to start beaming. They tend to start having narrower dispersion. So that would mean you're having fewer high-frequency reflections off of many surfaces, more mid-range reflections off of surfaces. And to our ear, that clues us in. That's a form of distortion. That clues our brain into going, wait a second, I'm not hearing a real live voice, because a real live voice would have even reflections of all the frequencies. I'm hearing something where the reflections aren't even, so maybe that's not a real voice, right? That's kind of what our brain does. So I'm saying this is one design that aids you in one specific form of distortion, which is even dispersion and even reflections. A coaxial or a concentric driver design helps you in that one aspect. So KEF's speakers, which are concentric drivers,
Definitely.
they would have that property as well. That doesn't mean they have equally low distortion in all the other forms of distortion. Maybe their frequency response isn't as flat. Maybe their harmonic distortion is higher or lower. Maybe their transient response is faster. There's lots of forms of distortion that can come in there. But in that one respect, talking about even dispersion of high and mid-range frequencies, a concentric driver can help you there. So
there you go. It's not like any one design of speaker is the design that creates the most realism.
Oh, no. There's many ways of coming at this. For example, Revel attacks this exact same issue of even dispersion by putting a waveguide on their tweeter, and that waveguide mimics the same dispersion as the mid-range driver. The tweeter is not embedded in the mid-range driver, but they give it a waveguide, which is a type of horn, you can think of it that way, a shaped surface, that gives it the same dispersion as the mid-range driver. So it's another way of coming at it.
Right on. Hector has one final question. What is
AV? We missed one to do with front, left, right, center speakers there.
Oh.
So,
I went too fast.
That's okay.
I'm sorry, Hector.
It comes around.
Okay, so this is not Hector's final question. What are the virtues of using 3 identical speakers across the front instead of the center speaker being a different design from the front, left, right? And we talk about timbre matching occasionally.
Yeah, I mean, the original idea was 3 identical front speakers, right? Like 3 bookshelf speakers, all vertical, or 3 tower speakers, all vertical, 1 front left, 1 center, 1 front right. That was the original idea, but people quickly realized if you do that, where does your TV go? Now, if you have an acoustically transparent projection screen, all 3 of your speakers can go behind the screen, and you can do that, and that's exactly what we kind of recommend. That's sort of the ideal.
It would be the ideal, yeah.
Yeah, but if you have a TV screen, then that would either mean you have a speaker directly in front of or directly behind the TV screen, either of which really isn't very optimal. You're either blocking your view or you're physically blocking the speaker, which will, of course, change the timbre of the sound. So as a compromise, they moved the center speaker either higher or lower, and then you had this vertical, very often bookshelf speaker, which just kind of looked weird, so people started turning them on their side, right? Yeah. And that's sort of how we ended up with horizontal center speakers, which have become sort of the norm. The ideal is, now, as Tom and I have said many times, just by virtue of the placement of the speakers themselves in the room, they're not automatically going to sound identical, right? You take one speaker and you leave it playing, but you move it around while you stay stationary, and the timbre doesn't remain identical no matter where you go in the room, because you have different distances to the boundaries of the room, and different reflections. Maybe you got a coffee table in front of you, something like that. That can change the timbre of the sound. But at least by having 3 identical speakers, you're starting with all of them producing the same sound to begin with. Therefore, any differences in timbre are due to the placement, or they're due to the room acoustics. There's no question that it was due to the speaker itself producing a different sound at the start of all this. So that's sort of the virtue of it. I don't know. James, your thoughts?
I agree with you 100%. You can get the exact same make, model, speaker, and move it into different parts of the room, and you're going to get different reflections. You're going to get different timbre sound. My recommendation is to stay within the same manufacturer if you can, just get that timbre match. But then, room EQ should take care of some of that theoretically, and a little bit of padding on the wall here and there to get rid of some reflections, that kind of thing. Yeah, Rob, I think Tom always says this. He says the room is 10 by 12 by 12, but with a big opening on the left.
Yeah.
You get a lot of that, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Pretty sure that left speaker is going to sound different.
Going to sound very different. Well, yeah, I mean, I can see it happen in my room EQ, because to my right is a foyer. And sure enough, the right speaker was EQ'd slightly differently, trying to compensate for the weirdness happening in that area. And
yeah, but it comes up a lot on this podcast, is the topic that I'm always hammering on, which is attribution, right? Knowing to what you should attribute as being the cause of the difference that you're hearing, right? Because people will say, I changed this component and that changed the sound, therefore clearly that component is responsible. I'm like, but maybe that component itself has multiple variables within it, right? And that's one of the things that we're frequently explaining on the podcast is what should you actually attribute the difference to? So in this case, if you're starting with 3 identical speakers, at least you don't have to attribute the difference in sound to the speaker itself producing different sound at the beginning. You're removing one variable. Right. It makes it that much easier for you to know, what do I need to adjust? Well, I need to adjust the EQ parameters, because I know that they started out producing the same sound. So if I'm not getting the same sound at my seat, it's not because the speaker itself did something out of line. So it's almost more of a mental thing than because the end result of 2 tower speakers and a horizontal center, the end result can be fantastic.
That's what I have.
Yeah. Even if strictly speaking they aren't producing identical sound because they're in different positions in the room, the end result can be great. So
yeah, in my situation, it's the tweeter that's common between the 2 tower speakers and the center channel.
Yeah,
and that helps because you're more sensitive in timbre matching to those higher frequencies. So now, Hector's final question: what is AVRant's release schedule?
Yeah. We don't really define it. We just leave it to people to find us. So
when it gets done, back off, Hector.
No, so our normal slated recording time is Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern time. They do observe daylight saving time, so during that portion of the year, it'll be Eastern daylight time. Right now, we're in Eastern Standard Time at 9 p.m. on Monday nights. We don't always make it. Schedules can change sometimes. Typically, Tom and I will record on Tuesday if we're not able to record on Monday. The YouTube video version, first of all, we have a live broadcast while we're recording the podcast, which is what we're doing right now for anyone who's viewing us right now. So that's going on live. That happens while we're actually recording the podcast. And then the following day, so if we record on Monday, on Tuesday, I will post the final YouTube version. If we record on Tuesday, I'll post it on Wednesday. Then Tom makes an audio-only version, and he posts that on Fridays. The exact hour can vary depending on how busy he is, but he gets that up there on Friday. Hector in his email also sort of wanted to know, when's the best time to write to you? The earlier in the week, the better, because we just answer questions in the order in which we receive them. If you write to us on Sunday night, it's very unlikely we will answer you the following day. It will most likely be a week and a day the Monday after that. If you write to us on Monday, you won't get answered that day, but you'll probably get answered the following Monday. So the earlier you write to us in the week, the better.
All right, you forgot the best part of the AVRant schedule, where it's like an hour before the show and the alert system goes off at
That's
my
right.
house, and I slide down the slide in front of my webcam right here.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.